Good morning, I'm Taylor Wilson, and today is Thursday, April 24th, 2025. This is the Excerpt. Today, Russia attacks Kyiv. What's next for peace talks? Plus, Trump gets some rough polling news when it comes to the economy, and how budget cuts include important Alzheimer's research. In the biggest attack on Ukraine's capital this year, Russia slammed Kyiv overnight with missiles and drones. The attacks left at least 8 people dead and dozens more injured. They also destroyed buildings and left fires throughout the city. The news comes at a critical moment for the conflict. President Donald Trump and his administration have threatened to walk away from efforts to broker a ceasefire if no progress is made, and European nations have been looking for their own solutions. Trump yesterday appeared to blame Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky for a lack of progress after Zelensky said he would not recognize Russia's occupation of the Crimea Peninsula as part of a peace deal. Most Americans now express little or no confidence in how President Donald Trump is handling the economy, according to a new Pew Research Center survey. I caught up with USA Today Washington Bureau Chief Susan Page to take a closer look at some of the poll's findings. Susan, always a treat. How are you today?
Well, Taylor, it's always great to be with you.
So let's start with tariffs. This has, of course, been the big headline-grabbing word in recent weeks. Do Americans mostly approve or disapprove of President Donald Trump's tariffs?
They mostly disapprove. 6 in 10 Americans in the new Pew Research Center poll say they don't like Trump's tariffs, and that includes 30% of Republicans. So even among his own party, there's a lot of skepticism about whether tariffs are the right thing to do.
All right, and how about the overall approval sense around Trump's job in office so far? How has this changed as well in recent months?
In this new survey, 40% of Americans approve of the job he's doing as president, 59% disapprove. That is worse than his standing in February. His approval rating's gone down 7 percentage points since then. And that is, I think, troubling for the White House. 40% is a pretty anemic approval rating. It is, though, in line with where Trump stood with Americans at this point during his first term.
And Susan, among his supporters, how do these numbers shake out at this point?
Trump's core supporters are still behind him 100%. They have been unshakable, but we're beginning to see a little erosion among those who were more reluctant to support him, but then ended up voting for him in November. These are, of course, the voters who enabled him to win the election. And while they were overwhelmingly in his corner the last time around, 88% approve, that's gone down to 75% approve now. That's not a terrible number, but it's lower than it was. And it is kind of a red flag for the White House.
Well, we knew the economy was a massive issue on the campaign trail, Susan, and maybe the biggest swing we've seen since Trump took office has to do with overall approval or disapproval of his approach to economic policy. What can you tell us about that?
In my mind, this is the most important thing we're seeing in this survey, because the economy is one of the big reasons that Trump got elected. Dissatisfaction with Joe Biden's handling of the economy contributed to his fall in standing, and concern about whether Kamala Harris would be able to handle the economy hurt her. This has always been a strength for Trump, but not now. When this poll was taken around the time of the election in November, Americans by 19 percentage points, 59% to 40%, said they were confident in Trump's ability to have good judgment about the economy. That has now flipped on its head. Most Americans, 54%, say they don't have much confidence in Trump on the economy. Only 45% are confident. That is the loss of one of the biggest political assets he's had since the point he got interested in politics.
Well, he does appear to be softening his tone a little bit around tariffs this week, Susan. Let's hear what he said yesterday about tariffs on China, which are now at 145% with some exceptions.
It'll come down substantially, but it won't be zero. It used to be zero. We were just destroyed. China was taking us for a ride, and just not going to happen. It's not going to happen.
Might a shift in rhetoric help him with any of these fading numbers, Susan?
You know, we see unhappiness with the economy, nervousness about it in this poll. We've also seen that in the markets with this roller coaster stock market we've been watching. And I think that President Trump is responding to that. He has started to talk about, yes, he'll negotiate a deal with China to reduce the very stiff tariffs he's imposed there. He also has said now that he doesn't intend to try to fire Jerome Powell, the chairman of the Federal Reserve. That's another thing that it kind of unnerved the market. So we see, I think, the president responding to some of the things we're hearing from Americans.
Susan, what do Americans like about Trump and his presidency so far?
Well, in this poll, there was an open-ended question asked, which is describe in a few words the thing you like best about Trump's presidency so far. And the number one answer, 30%, was nothing. When you go to actual issues, the top-ranked issue that he got approval on was immigration. 20% cited that. That is not a happy electorate.
All right, and I know we have some findings here about views on the parties themselves. I think folks really kind of wondering what the future looks like for both Democrats and Republicans in this moment, Susan. What did we find here?
A lot of bad news for Trump in this poll, but I tell you, this is not rebounding to the benefit of Democrats, at least not so far. In fact, the Republican Party has a more favorable rating now than the Democratic Party does. That's a reverse from what we've seen in recent years. And even among Democrats, only 75% of them say they approve of the Democratic Party.
All right, fascinating findings. Folks can find this full story with a link in today's show notes. Susan Page is USA Today's Washington Bureau Chief. Thank you, Susan.
Hey, thank you, Taylor.
President Trump signed an executive order yesterday aimed at bringing artificial intelligence into K-12 schools. The directive, reported first by USA Today before Trump's signing, instructs the education and labor departments to create opportunities for high school students to take AI courses and certification programs and to work with states to promote AI education. Trump also directed the education department to favor the application of AI in discretionary grant programs for teacher training, the National Science Foundation to prioritize research on the use of AI in education, and the Labor Department to expand AI-related apprenticeships. Trump signed other executive orders yesterday, including a measure aiming to overhaul accreditation of colleges and universities, calling on the Justice Department and the Education Department to root out unlawful discrimination and ideological overreach, according to a White House summary. Another Trump order rolls back guidance on school discipline issued by the Obama administration. You can read more about his flurry of Wednesday moves with a link in today's show notes. Recent budget cuts from the Trump administration are impacting important research for Alzheimer's, a disease that affects some 7 million Americans and their loved ones. I spoke with USA Today health reporter Karen Weintraub to learn more. Hello, Karen.
Hello.
So would you just start by telling us about Ken Kozik and his work researching Alzheimer's and this extended family in Colombia?
Yeah, so for 30 years, some American researchers have been studying this family in Colombia. They've looked at the genetics of almost 5,000 of this extended family. And the reason this family is interesting is that many of them have a gene that causes early onset Alzheimer's, where, most people might start losing their memory at 70 or 75. These people start at 40 or 45, much, much earlier, 30 years earlier than the average. And if they have this particular gene, they will get Alzheimer's. It is deterministic. It's been interesting because very few people have this gene, luckily, but many members of this extended family have it. So by studying what's different about these people, researchers have learned a lot about Alzheimer's. One of the things, for instance, we know that the signatures of Alzheimer's are two proteins, clumps of beta amyloid and tangles of this protein called tau. And it's this family that has taught us that, basically. And then 5 or 6 years ago, they found a 70-year-old woman in this family, extended family, who had the genetic mutation but did not develop Alzheimer's. She was 70. Her memory was clear. She ended up dying recently, 75, I believe, of melanoma, so not related to Alzheimer's. Turned out when they autopsied her brain, she had beta amyloid. She had one of these proteins, but not tau. And so by studying her, they're trying to understand what was protective, what other genes she had that protected her from getting this early onset Alzheimer's. And now, unfortunately, this research has had to be stopped because it's lost its federal funding.
Yeah, so it's a great explainer there. So what has happened now to these budget cuts from the Trump administration? What else can you tell us about this?
In this particular case, the researchers no longer have money to continue studying this family. They have all this data. I'm not exactly sure what the storage implications are. They have all this blood samples stored. I don't know what happens to that. But they are not the only ones, even in the Alzheimer's, even in the dementia field, who are affected by budget cuts. There are many others. One who I traded emails with is a gentleman at Harvard who studies testing diagnostics and developing diagnostics for, in this case, ALS, but also Alzheimer's and other dementias. And he's lost his funding as well. And so from a lot of different angles, Alzheimer's research is being affected, from the diagnostics to the really basic science, deep understanding of what goes wrong in the human brain to cause Alzheimer's. And the concern is some of this, a little bit, might be made up with private funding, but for 75, 80 years, the American scientific establishment has been supported with federal money. And Trump is changing that dynamic right now. And so if given a number of years to adjust, maybe the system could adjust, but it's been very abrupt. It's been essentially overnight that these folks have lost their funding. And so they're really struggling to figure out what to do next and how to continue their life's work.
And Karen, do we hear anything from the, the Trump perspective on all this?
The focus there is they're saying it's on efficiency, and that the federal priorities have changed, and this is not it anymore. Much of the funding that was cut was directed at what they considered diversity kind of funding, so studying specific populations of people, women included. A lot of that funding has been cut. But again, because of the widespread cuts, it has affected even things like Alzheimer's that affect everybody. 7 million Americans currently have Alzheimer's, and many more predicted to develop it in the future.
Karen Weintraub covers health for USA Today. Thank you, Karen.
Thanks.
Hear about some of the impacts Health and Human Services Secretary Robert F. Kennedy Jr. is having on public health. Check out our special episode from yesterday. We have a link in today's show notes. The first round of the NFL Draft is tonight. You can tune in at 7 p.m. Eastern before the following rounds over the next couple days. And as always, be sure to follow along with USA Today Sports. If you've ever seen someone dolled up in an extravagant costume at Comic-Con, you've maybe spotted a superfan. But is the experience of being in a fandom even deeper?
We need to take popular culture seriously as something that generates meaning and give people purpose.
That's sociologist Michael Elliott, who has researched Comic-Con for 7 years. He joined my colleague Dana Taylor to share what he found. You can find that episode on this feed beginning at 4 p.m. Eastern Time. And thanks for listening to The Excerpt. You can get the podcast wherever you get your audio. And if you're on a smart speaker, as always, just ask for The Excerpt. I'm Taylor Wilson, and I'll be back tomorrow with more of The Excerpt from USA Today.